Hey everyone, Barryz here. Sorry guys, it's been a little while. I've been busy. Yeah, anyway, I'm back now. Today I'll be going as in-depth as I can into Trypticon Station, what its purpose was, what the layout was like, and how the once great Cybertronian was forced into a tragic life of servitude. Long before the Autobot and Decepticon Civil War, Trypticon was born from the well of Allsparks as a Titan-class Transformer, a type of colossal Transformer who towered over many of his companions below. However, at this point in time, Titans were far more common before the war. However, over time, they became a dying breed of Cybertronian. Whether they rusted away or their tremendous size made them easy targets when the war inevitably did break out, the Titans became a dying breed. Trypticon was fortunately, or unfortunately, considering what would later happen to him, spared from the destruction which befell most of the other Titans on Cybertron. Before the Civil War, Trypticon's massive size would lead him to becoming approached by the pre-war Autobot government. Under the pressure of Zeta Prime and the High Council, Trypticon was forced to become an orbital station, high above Cybertron, forced against his will to become nothing more than a stationary object, a location in which scientists could conduct research and experiments that were deemed too risky to conduct planetside. The primary research conducted within Trypticon Station was of course Dark Energon, left behind by the expulsion of Unicron. However, it can be assumed that a failed cure for cosmic rust was also studied on board. However, unlike most of the labs conducting research on the Rust Plague, Trypticon Station would never have an outbreak of rust, and all traces would be destroyed upon Zeta Prime's orders. In the years of the Civil War, Trypticon Station would become a home for Autobot scientists, who sought refuge from the war on the planet below. Guarded by a skeleton crew of mercenaries hired by the Autobots so as to not waste any Autobot soldiers on guarding a decommissioned lab. Fun fact, this is actually the one and only time that we see the mercenary faction in the Cybertron games, as almost none of the soldiers sport Autobot symbols throughout the level. The crew would be able to effectively manage the station while being mostly disconnected from Cybertron below, with Energon being supplied through a short-distance space bridge which linked the station to the planet below. As time went on, the station's technology quickly became outdated compared to the improvements made during the war below. An example of this outdated technology can actually be seen in-game, as the holograms Starscream uses have inverted colors, as opposed to the newer, more functional holograms which Zeta Prime uses, which do not display this error. Due to the outdated technology on board the station, a critical malfunction occurred within the Dark Energon reactor. The resulting meltdown caused a total destruction of a segment of the outer hull. The mercenaries on board quickly closed off all access to the ravaged area to preserve the scientists who were barely able to prevent a complete meltdown of the Dark Energon reactor. After this event, all Dark Energon experiments came to a halt, as the scientists and mercenaries alike decided that the Dark Energon was too volatile to continue experimenting with, and subsequently locked it away and destroyed whatever Dark Energon they could not contain safely. Due to Trypticon's continued entrapment as a space station, he would eventually enter a nearly comatose state, as his consciousness and life gave way to the cold and static space station he had been forced for thousands of years to become. Later on in the war, Megatron became desperate for any chance at turning the tide and beating the Autobots. This desperation came to a head when he learned of an ancient mythological substance known as Dark Energon, which promised immense power granted to whoever could survive its harsh elements. Megatron led a detachment of Decepticons to Trypticon Station, slaughtering the mercenaries and taking the scientists on board as prisoners, before finding and claiming Dark Energon within their reactor. Megatron's use of Dark Energon was a momentous achievement for the Decepticon military, as with this new corrupting power, they had a significant tactical advantage over the Autobot military's fairly traditional strategy of warfare. But also, Megatron is the very first Cybertronian to bend Dark Energon to his will that we know of anyway. After witnessing Megatron tame the effects of Dark Energon, 3 mercenaries named Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp would join the Decepticons, while a scientist who worked on the station named Jetfire would abandon the station and warn the Autobots of the Decepticons' newfound power. Once the station was within Megatron's control, he would connect the geosynchronous space bridge from Trypticon Station to his main base within Kaon. Trypticon Station would become a strategically imperative outpost for the Decepticons, as they were able to use the station as a kind of blockade to monitor any spacefaring vessels fleeing Cybertron. While on board the station, Soundwave would uncover information that the station they had taken over was once a living Cybertronian. He took these findings to Megatron, who was quite intrigued by the idea of the station being a living Cybertronian who may be convinced to aid the Decepticons in the Civil War. Soundwave informed Megatron that Trypticon was in a form of stasis, barely even conscious, and as such, Megatron would have to perform something drastic in order to wake the Titan from his slumber. Yeah, because I guess crashing a starship into him wasn't enough to wake him up, huh? Must be a heavy sleeper. Megatron, in his infinite wisdom, decides that the best way to wake up Trypticon is to massacre all of the scientists they had captured as prisoners of war. I'm sorry, what? Once Trypticon awoke due to the absolute horror and sorrow he felt within him, Megatron immediately began bargaining with the Titan. Megatron told him of his imprisonment and solitude as a result of the Autobot government, and spoke of his rise to rebellion against the very government which had abused them both. Megatron promised Trypticon freedom to transform once again to take revenge on those who had enslaved him for so long. Once the time was right, of course. Trypticon, now being fully greeted by someone who had suffered as he had, who promised him the freedom which had become a distant memory, instantly agreed to join the Decepticon cause. Trypticon would hold still while the Decepticons upgraded his onboard systems and outfitted him with much more powerful weapons, allowing his new Liberators to use the station as they pleased while he waited for Megatron's orders. After Optimus shut down the core of the planet and ordered the Autobots to flee the planet, Megatron finally gave the order to allow Trypticon to take his revenge. He shot down the fleeing Autobot ships, the first step in his plan to glorious revenge. The aerial bots cleared out the remaining Decepticons on board and took the bait, destroying the lock that the Autobots had crudely mounted to his transformation cog. Trypticon was finally free to transform at will, to which he immediately did, causing the 3 aerial bots to barely escape, observing in horror as Trypticon was now rocketing towards Optimus's location. The aerial bots did what they could and ended up disabling his flight systems, causing the Decepticon Titan to crash into the center of Iacon City, completely destroying most of the once great city. On the ground, Trypticon survived the fall, only to immediately be set upon by Optimus Prime, who promptly defeated him in combat. After Trypticon was finally granted his freedom, he was nearly instantly beaten down by the Autobots, once again. Upon his defeat, the Autobots, once again, forced him into a kind of stasis. However, now that their resources were far more limited than they had once been, only Trypticon's body was held in stasis. He was still completely conscious within his own body. The Autobots, being low on energon and resources after their capital city was leveled by Trypticon, decided to use the very being which destroyed their city to refuel it. The Autobots began cannibalizing Trypticon's body, his mind still conscious and awake for all of the pain of the Autobots cutting off his limbs, bleeding him dry of energon to fuel themselves, slowly taking apart his systems, his brain, to aid the technology advancement needed to fuel their war. All the while, Trypticon can feel everything. The Autobots build a containment building to house Trypticon's many pieces. All the while, Trypticon's only hope is for a rescue operation from the Decepticons, who would surely recover such a destructive ally such as himself. Trypticon would remain like this for 20 years after War for Cybertron concluded, when finally during the last week of the Great Exodus, Megatron finally arrived. Trypticon was relieved, finally, after all this time, the Decepticons had returned to finally free him, like they had promised to so long ago. Trypticon's hopes were immediately shattered when Megatron announced that he was not there on a rescue mission, and he ordered Soundwave to reform Trypticon into a spacecraft capable of transporting the Decepticons off-world. Trypticon had been betrayed. Thousands of years ago, the Autobots forced him to be a spacecraft for them, and finally, when the Decepticons came around and promised him freedom, they turned around and did the exact same thing as the Autobots. Megatron didn't even gift Trypticon the luxury of death, instead allowing Trypticon to again be fully conscious within a body he had no control over. His body morphed against his will, the pain excruciating as he was forced to take a form he was not born into. and the Decepticons boarded him, soon to launch to intercept the Autobots' Ark near the open portal high above Cybertron. So, that's been my return to the Lore For Cybertron series. Trypticon is a character that we don't really get to see very much in the Cybertron games, but after reading his lore and listening to some of the audio logs in Fall of Cybertron, I can't help but think that Trypticon's story is such a tragic part of these games. His whole life he had been used by a corrupt government, and then once he is finally freed by those who were just as oppressed as he is forced back into a life of pain and servitude. Trypticon is not as villainous as he appears at first. Instead, I believe that he's fighting for a freedom that the Autobots promised but did not deliver. Anyway, a little announcement here at the end of the video. I'm going to be changing the upload schedule from every 5 days back to the weekly upload schedule from long ago. I'm doing this so I don't get burned out of making videos, but for now anyway, I'll be making another video that will go out this week on Transformers Reactivate. So if you're interested in that game, or you happen to be one of my original 300 subscribers, then stay tuned because I should have some fun things to show off soon. Anyway, thank you all for watching today's video. All hail Megatron.